Today on Game Changers, we have a special guest you're not going to want to miss. It's Jose Felix Pepe Diaz. He's a Cuban-American success story here from Miami, Florida. You may have recognized him from being a state rep, but you'll also recognize him from being on The Apprentice. So check it out. Stick around.
Most people don't know I was on The Apprentice, and I was. Fired. I looked homeless. She thought I was homeless.
Oh,
and that's how she treated me.
What do you think is more important, network or net worth?
And
welcome to Game Changers Live from our home studio here at the College of Communications, Architecture, and the Arts in beautiful Miami, Florida, at the campus of FIU, Florida International University. And my guest today is Jose Felix Pepe Diaz, one of the most influential lobbyists and public servants here in South Florida. My friend, welcome to the show, brother.
Dude, happy to be here. What a setup! I mean, this is a pretty cool setup you have here, and it's amazing what you guys are doing. You've had some amazing guests, and I'm lucky and privileged to be the next one.
Thank you. Hey, so you grew up in Miami. We want to get into the whole story, kind of how you grew up, how you got into politics and law, and all the influential boards that you sit on now, the impact that you're having in the community and in the country. But tell me about kind of growing up for you. And what was young Pepe thinking about when if you go back to your 6-year-old, 10-year-old self, was he imagining your life now, or what were you thinking about back then?
Absolutely not. Like my story is so weird because I grew up really as an introvert. I was a very shy kid. I was a super nerd. Glasses, chunky little kid. Afraid of his own shadow, definitely could not have anticipated one day being as extroverted as I am now. And really growing up in this community in Tamiami Park, not too far away from here, really started discovering myself and figuring out who I was. And it wasn't until high school that I discovered student council and student government that my life changed, and it really just opened me up and forced me to become a little more extroverted. And so like even now, I would say I am an extroverted introvert, right?
Yeah.
At my core, if I'm like in a new setting, my first instinct is probably to stick to the people I know. But I have learned to force myself over the last 30 years to go out, meet new people, and it's proven to be very fruitful.
Yeah, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable is one of the things that I've always, tried to do every day, right? Make yourself uncomfortable a little bit each day, and you get used to that. And definitely, look, your network is your net worth, right? And that's probably something that you've, easily paved your path with along the way.
Well, I love people, and that's something that drives me. Is I get a lot of fulfillment talking to people and meeting people and hanging out with people. I do a lunch and a breakfast and a dinner almost every day. It's part of my brand, and it's also what makes me excited about continuing. And a lot of people find happiness on the weekends. They work through the week and they're unhappy, and they're only happy on Fridays and Saturday. I'm a very YOLO type of person that you never know what tomorrow brings. You could get struck by lightning.
Yeah.
So I live every day to the fullest, and that means for me getting to know people, developing relationships. There's a book that I read when I was in college called Never Eat Alone. It's by a guy called Keith Ferrazzi.
Yeah.
And every time I meet a young person, I tell them, I go, read this book. It's going to tell you a little bit about the importance of other people and the importance of networking and the importance of getting out into the universe and learning about different principles and different practices and different professions. And that's kind of been one of my mantras, right? Get to know people, and that makes you a more well-rounded person.
Yeah. And at UM, you attended UM, right? And then you went to law school in Columbia, I believe?
Yeah.
So what were some of the pivotal things that influenced you at UM? I came to FIU, I was in student government, I was student body president here, and that was hugely impactful for me. What were those key lessons that you learned in college and in law school that were pivotal in your life?
By the time I got to college, I had already found myself. I knew that I loved leadership and I loved being involved. And as a freshman, I rushed the fraternity system and was not in love with what was out there. So I decided to start my own fraternity. SIGEP
really?
did not exist at UM.
No kidding.
And my best friends had joined SIGEP at UF and at Miami at FIU. So I met with the national headquarters and got like a group of guys and became president of a fraternity my freshman year. Did that for 5 semesters and got mega involved on campus.
Right.
I was also student body president at the University of Miami after having been student body president of my high school, and got involved on national boards of director for my fraternity, national board of directors of the Order of Omega, meeting and dealing with people that were much older than me.
Right.
And that to me was a pivotal point in my life because I learned the importance of staying quiet, observing, learning from other people, listening. I had a very prominent former executive of Microsoft that sat on one of these boards. And he told me, usually the smartest person in the room is the one that's saying the least.
Right.
And that person, when they speak, people listen because they haven't wasted their time throughout the day. And so in my life, as I've progressed in my career, and we'll go into some of the stuff I've done, I have found comfort in not always being the first to speak. I found comfort in listening and learning. And even in my daily interactions when I meet with people, I definitely spend more time listening than I do speaking because people want to tell you their stories, and that's how you connect. And I find that some of the strongest connections are listening to somebody and then being able to like reflect on something in my life that we have in common. And creating that nexus, the similarities, really ingratiates yourself with people. Like it makes you more likely to establish a human connection if you've shared similar past. So for example, you mentioned to me that you were student government president. Immediately I'm going to tell you, oh my God, I was student government president too.
Reflecting back,
and now we're kindred spirits. We've done something in common.
Exactly.
And I think better than most, having gone through that experience, that you have real tough decisions to make as a 17 or 18-year-old or a 21-year-old, and you're having to enforce penalties on somebody who's missing meetings that you need to kick out, who might be your friend. As a fraternity leader and as a young kid, it was very tough for me when the grades came out and we had minimum standards that we needed to meet with. And my little brother in the fraternity, one of them wasn't making his grades and ultimately left the school. One of my best friends, and so, what do you do when you're having to tell one of your peers that you need to hold them accountable even though you don't want to?
Right.
So that type of trial by fire at a young age makes you a stronger person.
So I want to go back to something that you mentioned about branding yourself, because that is, I think, is critically important now more than ever. As an individual, we all kind of have our brands, right? And you started building kind of your brand, your character, your reputation in the early days, even in high school. You started thinking about it in college and so forth, right? How important is that for individuals out there in terms of thinking about, okay, everything is documented these days. Unlike when we were growing up, the social media wasn't necessarily around to capture everything.
I speak to a lot of kids. I go to high schools and colleges and talk to young people, and I tell them, look, it's very unfortunate the world that you're living in.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah. Having a camera on you 24 hours a day, having basically an impossible number of paparazzis all around you. Like everybody at any time, if you're doing something silly, can videotape you.
Yeah.
And it might not come back immediately, but 5 or 10 years down the line, you might be running for office. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden a video comes out of you doing something stupid. We were lucky that we didn't have that.
Right.
But I was always very cognizant of my reputation and my image. Right. I thought coming out of college that I might want to get into the FBI. So I was always super clean cut, man. To this day, I haven't smoked a cigarette. I was always very conscientious about my drinking. I didn't want to get a DUI, you know, and not judging people that have, but
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
very cognizant at a young age, definitely more cognizant than somebody my age
Right.
would be. And I don't see that same level of cognition in the next generation. I think that they have kind of grown up numb to the proliferation of technology. And so I think that they're certainly making mistakes that can haunt them. I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen things posted from young people that, you know, make the hairs in my hands and my arms stand up. And so, you know, it's very scary for our kids and their friends and the next generation to understand just how dangerous all these recordings can be. And it's not only the recordings. I think it's also like on the brand side, you know, I've had resumes that have been sent to me with email addresses that are ridiculous, you know, like sexy cowgirl 69 at yahoo.com. I mean,
perfect lobbyist.
yeah, and that's obviously like an exaggeration, but but you know, if you get, you know, people will treat you the way you portray yourself.
Correct.
I'll give you an example. When I was at Columbia, I was, you know, like most law students, leaving everything to the last minute, and so we would have one exam for every class. And I'll never forget that back then, as the semester started kind of progressing, I would let my beard grow long, my hair grow longer. I had this big green jacket that I would wear everywhere, and I got on the subway to go study for a ethics course that I needed to take a test on. And in the subway, I'm sitting down, and a little old lady comes in with like her granddaughter holding her hands, and you know, I think my abuela would kill me if I don't give up my seat.
Right.
So the first thing I do is I give up my seat. The lady looks at me, smiles, thanks me, and she gave me $1. And I took the $1 because I was a poor law student, but I really learned a valuable lesson. I looked homeless. She thought I was homeless.
Oh,
and that's how she
no.
treated me. And I
That's funny.
kind of woke up and I said, you know what? Like the way you
What am I doing?
dress,
Right.
the way you know, how kempt you are, the way you have your hair, your beard, like that matters.
Absolutely.
You know, if you look homeless, people will treat you homeless. And so I tell young people all the time is like, you know, dress the part.
Yeah.
You know, when you're going for an interview, dress the part.
So you go to Columbia Law School, you're in New York. So personal question, cafecito or American coffee? Did you switch when you went to New York or did you stay there?
So I'm a forever cafecito guy. I love
Figured I knew
cafe.
the answer to that question.
But in law school, one of the coolest things I did was I did a study abroad program in Buenos Aires. So
nice.
I had kind of done this already in high school. I had done a small trip to France with a group of my high school peers. Then in college, I did a study abroad in Greece. And now law school comes around. At Columbia, they have this amazing program with the University of Buenos Aires. I went to Buenos Aires and I picked up some new habits like mate.
Oh,
I
really?
loved mate in law
my
school.
gosh.
I thought it was so fun. And
Messi's favorite drink.
and
right?
I actually worked as a bouncer in a nightclub in
No.
Buenos Aires.
You're kidding.
My best friend's
funny.
family was familiar with a young man that lived in Buenos Aires, and he was the manager of nightlife at the most prominent nightclub at the time. It was Asia de Cuba, so you know,
Oh my
back
God,
to
how funny.
back to our
Yeah,
Cuban
perfect,
roots.
perfect.
And you know, I was working at a massive law firm, making a good amount of money. I didn't need the money, but I wanted to meet people. And so he told me, he goes, you know, we would love to have you. You know, we need somebody to translate. A lot of our clients are American.
Yeah.
And you're a big guy. You know, I'm 6'4".
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, maybe you could scare some people. and it was such an exciting time of my life. I met so many crazy people. Like soccer players were coming on a nightly basis. Argentine celebrities. Like I was in the scene
Right.
at the age of 24 years old.
Right.
I got to travel extensively through South America. Got to go to Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile. I got to know Latin America
Yeah.
at a time that most people don't get to know it, and really started to focus even my legal trajectory on international law and international relations because it always excited me. I love traveling.
Sure.
If you follow me on Instagram or on social media, you'll see that I live to travel. And so I have now figured out a way with what I do to travel and get paid for it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm currently, and we'll talk about what I do, but, you know, I'm currently a registered lobbyist for Japan. Like, that's literally my client. Like, one of the coolest places on earth. No kidding. Pays my firm money for us to represent them in Washington and Tallahassee and Miami. And that to me, like, if you told, you know, quiet 8-year-old me that I would one day be
represent the country of Japan,
representing the country of Japan and Guatemala and Qatar and some of the other places I've represented, I wouldn't believe it.
That's a dream.
It's a dream. Right. So I have the luckiest life. I tell people that in my next life I want to come back as me. Right. And so
well, look, there's a point there because that's important because I'm a big believer in designing your life, right? Kind of like lifestyle design. And like you said, a lot of people go to work Monday through Friday and they're, you know, they got a case of the Sunday blues because the next day they have Monday. I look forward to Mondays, you know, but it wasn't always the case. And if you don't make that change and say, okay, what do I want with my life? Because time goes by so fast. I mean, you get older and all of a sudden, like, the years are just flying by, right? I mean, that's so important. So you decided, all right, this is the kind of life I want to have. You became a state rep, and you were that for about 6-7 years.
Correct.
What was that like?
So,
I mean, what was that like to run, and what made you decide to run?
Being like a young political kid and having worked for U.S. senators and having worked on campaigns and having followed politics, I kind of always knew that maybe there would be a world where I would run for office.
Yeah.
But I didn't come from a political family. My mom was a teacher. My dad was an engineer. Nobody in my family had been part of like these Miami dynasties, right?
Yeah, political families.
Where, you know, if you have this last name, you're automatically given a seat, right? In Congress. That wasn't my case. I was the first person in my family to really love politics, and I needed to figure it out for myself. I got very lucky that I found a mentor, a guy called Mike Abrams. He was a former state legislator.
Right.
Introduced me for the first time to the concept of the state legislature. Like, what is this thing? The state has its own Congress?
Yeah.
And so when I graduated from Columbia, Mike got me my first job at Ackerman, Centerfit at the time, which was the biggest law firm, or one of the biggest law firms in Miami. Right. And I shadowed him. And I was doing international litigation and arbitration, but I was also dabbling a little bit in government affairs. And he asked me to go with him to Tallahassee to work on behalf of some amazing nonprofits like the National Parkinson's Institute and Jackson Memorial Hospital and the Epilepsy Foundation, like really fun, good
meaningful
clients. Yeah, meaningful clients. And I went up there and I was riveted. Yeah. You know, I loved it. I remember the first time that Rene Garcia, who was a state house member at the time, eventually became a senator. He's a commissioner. Yeah. He's the first person that brought me to the floor of the Florida House of Representatives.
Wow.
And like, I just remember
it's a great guy too.
Standing there and just being in awe of this chamber that had the picture of 100 years of speakers of the houses. And so at a very young part of my career, I said, I want to do this, and I want to do this soon. Mm-hmm. So in my late 20s, I think I was 28 years old, I filed to run for office and started knocking on doors. And I will tell you that I had 4 consecutive races for the Florida House. None of them were givens. Like, I was the underdog multiple times, including my first race. And I just knocked on doors and knocked on doors. And I have a huge family, like a huge, dedicated, supportive family. And my family knocked their tails off for me.
No kidding.
And so I knocked the first time in 2009 on probably 10,000 doors.
Jeez.
And my stories are endless. I mean, I have so many stories about that time. I can imagine. But having grown up in Miami, I had all these amazing connections. Like, I would knock on a door and recognize the last name. And I went to high school with your daughter. I played baseball with your son.
Right, there was always some kind of connection.
I did taekwondo with your nephew. And one of the great gifts that I have is I have a prolific memory.
Oh yeah.
For people, for names, like
faces, everything.
I'm a little savanty in that regard. Like if I met you when we were 5 years old,
you remember
for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And
that's a gift.
It's a gift, and something that served me very well in the legislature. Now, look, that doesn't mean that if I haven't seen you in 20 years, you might look different and I might not recognize you immediately. But if you give me a context clue of how we know each other, within 3 seconds I'll pick it up and I'll know who you are. And that helped me when I knocked on doors. People loved that connection.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, the funniest thing for me though, as somebody who loves people and loves to connect with people that have similarities with me, was like knocking on the door of somebody who, like, I was very good friends with their son or daughter. And like having to fight for the vote of somebody that I thought, just because I know your daughter, that should be it.
That should be it. Yeah,
man,
we got a connection.
It should be a home run. But some people are like super into politics, and they're like, where do you stand on this issue? Where do you stand on this issue? I'm like, oh my God, I had to fight for the vote.
Yourself.
You know, but it was always a thrill. And I will tell you, there were times that I didn't get the vote. You know, the way that Miami works, there's people that have friends that are closer, that are running against me. I won that first race and started serving around 2010. To me, it was like a golden era of politics. It was before like X and Twitter became as hard, you know, left and right. You know, moderacy was something that was actually much more rewarded back then. So we worked together with, you know, Republicans and Democrats and compromised and fought together and fought against each other. But it wasn't as negative where you weren't like branded as evil if you had dinner with somebody from the other party.
Sure.
And I loved my time.
It was a different time.
Office. And I learned so much. You know, you come in, I'm a 29-year-old kid getting elected. You know, I know just enough to be dangerous, but, you know, I'm sitting now on the Energy and Utilities Committee.
Got some fresh ideas.
Sitting on banking and insurance and education committees, and I'm having to learn about all these things. There's 2,000 bills that get filed in the state legislature every year.
Wow.
120 House members, 40 senators, sessions 2 months. It's 60 days out of the year. It's supposed to be a part-time legislature. And you have to really digest an extreme amount of information and vote based on your conscience, based on what your voters want. But in the meantime, you learn so much. And so I feel like I am much more well-rounded as a human being.
Yeah.
I feel like I can be a better father and a better member of my community because I had that experience. It was a definitional point in my life.
Yeah.
Like you said, I served for 4 terms. But that's all you can serve. There's a term limit. I decided at the end of my time in the House to run for the Senate. It was the first time in my life I lost a big election, but I also learned a lot. I'll never forget having lost an election where a lot of people expected me to win. It was the first time now the tables had turned.
Right.
I remember being at this event, and I had friends from all across the state and really all across the country that were in this room, and I felt like I was at my own funeral, consoling people, because people were crying, and I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna be fine, like, and I was. I mean, I'm an optimistic person. I never lost sight of the fact that, you know, I have an amazing family, I have amazing kids, I have an amazing wife, I have amazing parents, I have all these amazing things going on in my life. Like, I'm not defined by this position, and so that has always kept me very grounded.
So yeah, and that's interesting because a lot of people will define themselves by their title. Right, that their self-worth and their self-esteem is designed by, okay, I'm the vice president, I'm the executive vice president, and then what happens? You lose that job, you lose that election. All of a sudden, like, okay, who are you, right? And staying grounded as a dad, as a husband, that, you know, that core, right? So that you're not just defined by your job. It's, you know, you're defined by who you are.
You are,
right?
And I think people lose sight of that. At the end of the day, man, you've heard it from a million people. Like, when you're in your deathbed, you're not worried about the titles you had and the awards you got and the plaques you had on your wall. It's the people that you met along the way. I tell people if I was a dog, I would have a waggly tail all the time every time I interacted with somebody, because I just love meeting people and getting to know them. And so running for office really scratched an itch that I didn't know I had. It really focused me and allowed me to hone in on relationship making and relationship building, and it's been everything for me.
Yeah. So you were on The Apprentice, right? So tell me about that. What was that like, being on TV?
Well, I think we're kind of dating ourselves here and assuming people even know what The Apprentice was. In the early 2000s, reality TV had become a big thing. Remember, and like everybody wanted to be Survivor, and in 2004, Donald Trump, this real estate tycoon that people knew but they didn't really know,
of course,
starts this TV show, and it becomes the hottest show in America. And I loved it. I mean, I was already living in New York, and so Donald Trump was iconic in New York. At that point, people actually liked him in New York, and I was friends with Donna Shalala. Shalala was president of the University of Miami, and most people don't know this, but she was also president of Hunter College previously, which is one of the public universities in New York, and she knew Trump. So Trump actually had an audition in Miami at the University of Miami, and she recommended me as a potential candidate. 1 million people had applied, and I'm like 24 years old, never really had a job. I had been working as like a summer associate at a law firm, but I'm in law school, just graduating, and I applied, and the executive producer was the guy who interviewed me, and at the time I had just become college student of the year. It was like a thing for the state of Florida, and I was holding. I brought my little magazine to show them what I had accomplished in college, and the guy looks at me and he goes, "So, why do you think that you should be on the TV show?" And I said, "Because I'm freaking awesome." Like, that was my answer. Like, I just being a cocky little 24-year-old.
Yeah.
And the guy says, "As soon as you answer that, I knew that you were going to get on the show." He goes, we love people that are confident and sure of themselves.
Right.
And that's the type of
the kind of character you want to have on the show.
And so they flew us out to LA, and I think they like whittled it down to like 200 people. Mm-hmm. And they flew us out to LA to get interviewed, and that number got whittled down to 50. And then once you're like in the top 50, it's Donald Trump and Mark Burnett, the executive producer, interviewing you. So like Trump was like, I'm like sitting in front of Trump debating people who are like 15 years my elder and multimillionaires and running their own businesses.
Yeah.
And I'm like a student government kid, so like
at the time, you didn't have any business or anything.
No, but I'm like an air traffic controller. I'm trying to like negotiate like people like, okay, you should talk. Hey, calm down. Like I was like a calming force in the interview, and lo and behold, I got picked to be one of the 18 contestants on The Apprentice, and I had just graduated law school. I had just taken the bar. By the time we filmed, I found out I passed the bar on the show. And whether you're the first person fired or the last person fired, you're in New York for 3 months. Because imagine, you can't be the first person fired, go home, and everybody knows you got fired early.
Exactly.
So they sequester you. And really, you spend
You can't talk about it. You can't
talk about
anything.
it. You sign all these agreements with liquidated damages. If you say anything, they're going to sue you.
Wow.
They're gonna own you and your kids
Seriously,
and your family for the rest of NBC. And so I got on the show. I was the third person fired. I tell people I was fired in front of 25 million of my closest friends and family.
Wow.
And it was awesome at the time. I mean, it was a super
What did it
hot
feel
show.
like for Trump to say, "You're fired"?
He said, "Pepi, you're fired." It was devastating. I mean,
you were crushed.
I did not expect to go. We were in the boardroom for like 2 hours negotiating who should get fired, and like the gun was never really pointed at me. Like I felt very confident that I was going to survive that episode. As a matter of fact, in my episode, he fired somebody before me. a dear friend of mine, Stacy. And so he fires Stacy. I'm like, man, I'm so sad about Stacy leaving, but like, I survived.
I'm safe. Yeah.
And it was like one of the first times in the TV show's history that he fired 2 people.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, and Pepi, you were a terrible project manager. You lost faith. Your team lost faith in you. Like,
oh my
all
God.
the things that he says when you're getting fired. You're fired. It was the first time that Ivanka had been on the show. She was instrumental in that episode. It was all like such a cool experience, and the little alumni network of people that went on the show is extraordinary. Like some really cool people have been on the show. When I ran for office 4 years later, a bunch of them donated to my campaign.
No kidding.
And supported me. When my dad had his 50th birthday in Miami, a bunch of them flew in, and we had massive party. Like it's still a group of people I keep in touch with, and the irony is, fast forward, I become a legislator, and I represent Doral, where the Trump golf course is.
Right.
And so I'm a legislator, and Donald Trump is lobbying me on stuff that pertains to him.
Did you tell him, hey, you're fired?
Well, no, I did. So multiple, a couple years after I'm in office, I get invited to be MC at CPAC.
Right.
And I get to introduce Mitch McConnell and Kelly Ayotte and Tucker Carlson.
Amazing.
And Donald Trump.
Ooh, interesting.
And one of my friends, Richard Corcoran, who had been Speaker of the Florida House, told me, he goes, you should fire him.
Yeah.
And I got up there and I said a joke. I said, most people don't know I was on The Apprentice, and I was. And so I was fired by Donald Trump, and it took me many years to figure out what was really going on. And I think that because his daughter was on the show, he was afraid she would fall in love with me. So he got rid of her. He got rid of me early. He didn't want me
to
son-in-law.
Awesome.
Something along those lines.
Perfect.
And I go, and you know what? Now that I have an opportunity to repay the favor, I like to tell you, Mr. Trump, you're fired.
Yeah,
and
that's
so that was my
fantastic.
introduction of him. And he laughed and he gave me a hug. And I've seen him so many times after the show. He always recognizes me. It's unbelievable. I mean, like,
he has a good memory as well.
He's got a great memory. I've been at the Trump golf course at events where he's speaking, and he'll spot me out of the crowd. And when he became president, he actually invited me to the White House multiple times for Hispanic heritage events. And there was one event, it's like, these super prominent Hispanics from all over the country are in this room. And I'll never forget, I was in one of them, and he literally saw me, said, come here. And he like brought me behind the thing, brought me to Melania. I was like, hey, you remember Pepi from The Apprentice,
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, he's a very divisive figure.
Yeah.
My mom will never forgive Donald Trump for firing me.
Right.
And it was a traumatic event in her life.
She probably brought the chancleta.
If she could throw a chancleta at Donald Trump, she would. But man, the guy has always been very supportive of my career.
Right.
When I ran for office, he donated personal money to my campaign, and he's part of my story.
Right.
And when I ran for office for the Senate, the first 4 times I ran, he had never been in office. I was in office before Donald Trump. I think to this day, I'm the only apprentice candidate to ever have been elected. That could have changed, but for a long time that was the case. So I got elected before Donald Trump. He was never a campaign issue. Now in 2017, I'm running for the Senate, and the attack ads against me are Donald Trump's apprentice.
Right.
Which is like an easy
Of course,
attack.
an easy target.
But I had really defined myself politically without him. And now all of a sudden he's being injected into my campaign. And so, I love to talk about the experience because it was such a fun time in my life.
Interesting.
But what was a very innocent and fun, cool reality show experience now carries a different type of weight because he's become such a polarizing figure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've always tried to have my own brand, and, that is something I did, and a very positive experience in my life, but it doesn't define me.
Right. What do you think is more important, network or net worth?
I think they're 2 totally different things. I think it's important to have a good net worth and be able to take care of your family. Obviously, I'd rather have food on the table than, have a list of people that want to have lunch
But in
with me
terms
and I
of
can't afford lunch.
influence, right? Influence.
But for me, ultimately, everything is about people.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're good to people, I believe in karma, right? Like, I believe in helping people just because you can, not because you expect something in return. And that's always been the key to my success. And so networking and having a great network of people that support me and believe in me and that I've helped along the way has been worth more than, any paycheck, more than any salary, more than, any stock that I can purchase. And I define my success based on people, not based on money.
That's it. Pepe, thanks for being on the show, my brother.
Absolutely.
Congratulations, man, on your success, on your history, on your career, and your beautiful family. And I'm sure you have a million other things on your bucket list that I know that you're going to get to for sure, because you're leaving an impact that's a legacy for so many people.
I've lived many lives. I've been very lucky. I am one of the most blessed people. We're lucky to live in the greatest time in the history of the earth, in the greatest country, in an amazing city. So, every day I wake up and thank God for the blessings he's given me, and I do not take them for granted.
Awesome. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to share it with somebody that needs to hear it, because you can be the game changer in their life. Until next time, see you later.